In a desert outside the Egyptian city of Beni Hassan, archaeologists once opened the ground and found a cemetery. But there were no people buried in it. There were cats. Hundreds of thousands of them. Wrapped, preserved, stacked, and buried. So many that in the 1800s, a company dug them up by the ton, shipped 19 tons of mummified cats to England, and ground them into fertilizer for farm fields. 19 tons of mummified cats, sold by weight. That single fact tells you that the ancient Egyptians had a relationship with animals unlike anything before or since. They loved their pets so much they immortalized them. They worshipped some of them as living gods. And they killed millions of them in a religious industry so vast it's still being uncovered today. This is the strange, beautiful, and genuinely dark story of what the ancient Egyptians did with their animals. The pets they adored, the gods they fed, and the secret behind all those mummies. And the place to start is the animal you already know they loved, the cat. We tend to say, casually, that the Egyptians worshipped cats. That's not quite right, and the truth is more interesting. Egyptians didn't bow down to the cat in the street. They believed certain gods could appear in animal form, and the cat was sacred to one of the most beloved goddesses of all, Bastet, goddess of home, fertility, women, and protection. But long before any of that theology, the cat earned its place the practical way. Egypt's entire civilization ran on grain, vast granaries of wheat and barley that were the country's wealth, its wages, its very survival. And grain attracts mice, rats, and snakes. The cat, the small desert predator that started lurking around Egyptian villages, was the perfect weapon. It protected the food supply. It killed the cobras that could kill your children. It made itself indispensable. So the Egyptians did what humans do with an animal that protects them. They let it in, into the granary, then into the courtyard, then into the home, then into the heart. Cats appear in tomb paintings sitting under chairs at family dinners, curled beneath a wife's seat, wearing collars, eating from bowls. They had names. They were family. And the proof of how deep that love ran is in how they grieved. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting Egypt, recorded something that stunned him. When a household cat died a natural death, the entire family went into mourning. And as a sign of grief, every member of the household shaved off their own eyebrows. They would not stop mourning until their eyebrows had grown back. Imagine loving an animal so much that you wore your grief on your face for weeks. That was a normal Egyptian family losing the cat. And harming one was unthinkable. Killing a cat, even by accident, could carry the death penalty. There's an ancient account of a Roman diplomat in Egypt who accidentally killed a cat, and an enraged mob surrounded his house and lynched him, despite officials desperately trying to save him, because Egypt could not afford the diplomatic disaster. The crowd didn't care. You did not touch the cat. But cats were only the beginning, because the Egyptians kept a whole household of animals, and some of them might surprise you. Dogs were everywhere and deeply loved. They worked as hunters, guards, and herders, but they were also companions. And unlike cats, Egyptian dogs very often had names. Names we can still read today, carved onto their collars and their graves. Names like Brave One, Reliable, North Wind, and one we can translate simply as useless, which tells you Egyptian humor wasn't so different from ours. One pharaoh loved his dog so much that when it died, he had it buried with full honors, with its own coffin and linen and incense, treated like a nobleman. They kept monkeys and baboons as pets, sometimes trained to do tasks. They kept geese and ducks. The wealthy kept gazelles. Some households kept tame hyenas. And there's evidence they tried, at least for a while, to fatten them for food. They kept songbirds, and running through their rivers and temples were the animals they considered most sacred and most dangerous of all. Which brings us to the gods. Because here is where the Egyptian relationship with animals becomes something no other culture has matched. The Egyptians looked at the animal world and saw the divine staring back. Nearly every major god had an animal form. Thoth, god of wisdom, was the ibis and the baboon. Horus was the falcon. Anubis, lord of the dead, was the jackal. Sobek was the crocodile. Hathor was the cow. And in their great temples, they didn't just paint these animals, they kept them. Real, living, breathing animals, treated as the literal earthly vessel of a god. The most famous was the Apis bull. At any given time, one specific bull in all of Egypt was chosen, identified by sacred markings on its hide, and declared the living embodiment of a god. That bull lived a life of unimaginable luxury. It had its own temple, its own herd of cows, priests to serve it, the finest food, and crowds who came to ask it for prophecies. And when the Apis bull finally died, it was mummified with the same care as a pharaoh, embalmed, wrapped, and laid in a stone sarcophagus weighing as much as 60 tons, in a vast underground gallery built for nothing but dead sacred bulls. They held a national funeral for a bull, and then they went and found the next one, and the worship began again. The Egyptians kept sacred crocodiles in temple pools, decked them in gold jewelry, and fed them by hand. They kept sacred ibises by the thousand. To them, these weren't just symbols. They were the living presence of the gods on earth, and you cared for them accordingly. But now we have to talk about the part of this story that most people never hear. Because the love of animals and the worship of animals collided to create something staggering and disturbing. Remember those hundreds of thousands of cat mummies? Here's the thing. They weren't all beloved pets who died peacefully and got wrapped up by tearful families. Most of them weren't pets at all. The Egyptians developed the idea of the votive mummy, an animal offering to a god. If you wanted to send a prayer to Bastet, you bought a mummified cat and had it dedicated and buried at her temple. It was like lighting a candle in a church, except the candle was a cat. And as this practice exploded across Egypt, demand became enormous. Millions of pilgrims wanted to make offerings. Millions of animal mummies were needed. So the temples did what any operation does when demand explodes. They industrialized. Priests ran breeding farms next to the temples, raising cats, ibises, hawks, and other sacred animals by the millions, specifically to be killed young, mummified, and sold to worshippers as offerings. When scientists put modern CT scanners to these mummies, the evidence came out. Many of the cat mummies were kittens, just a few months old, and many had died from deliberate breaking of the neck. They were bred for the purpose. An estimated tens of millions of animal mummies were produced across Egypt's history. Beneath the city of Saqqara alone, the catacombs hold the remains of millions of ibises and other creatures. And then there's the detail that reveals just how commercial it all became. When researchers unwrapped many of these expensive, beautifully bound mummies, they found something was wrong. Some contained only a few bones. Some held just a single feather, or a scrap of skin, or a twist of mud and sticks shaped to look like an animal inside the wrappings. They were fakes. The supply couldn't keep up with the demand, so some sellers cut corners, wrapping up almost nothing and selling it to pilgrims as a sacred, complete offering. The world's first religious offerings. And already, 3,000 years ago, someone was running a scam on the faithful. So sit with the full picture, because it's a contradiction that's hard to hold in your head. The same civilization that shaved its eyebrows in grief for a dead house cat was breeding kittens by the million to kill them for the gift shop. The same people who would lynch a man for harming one cat built an industry on the deaths of millions. To them, there was no contradiction at all. A pet cat was family. A temple cat was a messenger to the divine. And sending it to the goddess wasn't cruelty, it was the highest honor, a sacred act of devotion. They simply drew the line in a completely different place than we do. Now strip it all back and look at what's really there underneath the mummies and the gods. These were people who looked at animals and refused to see them as just meat or just tools. They saw personalities worth naming, companions worth grieving, protectors worth honoring, a connection to something bigger than themselves, worth building temples for. The Egyptians were, as far as we know, the first civilization on Earth to fully fall in love with animals, to bring them into the family, write their names down, and weep when they were gone. We do it too. We give our dogs ridiculous names. We put cats in our family photos. We bury them in pet cemeteries with little headstones. We have entire industries built around animals we will never eat and never work, animals whose only job is to be loved. We think that's modern. It isn't. 4,000 years ago, in a mud brick house by the Nile, a family sat down to dinner, and a cat with a name and a collar curled up under the chair, waiting for scraps. And when that cat died, they cried, and they shaved their eyebrows, and they had it preserved so it could be with them forever. The bond you feel with the animal sleeping at the foot of your bed tonight, the Egyptians felt it first. They just took it further than anyone who ever lived.